But Portuguese prevailed, and I would say one of the explanations why, because they were mixing, because they, and on the basis of that mixing with locals,
Right.
first of all with the indigenous population that was already there, and then later on also with this slave population that was coming, in some way they were
Melting with them. Yeah.
melting with them, and they were in a situation to how to say, to prevail in fighting, let's say, the French and Dutch. So both French and Dutch were not staying in Brazil very long. This is it's possible to see the name of the ship. It's a ship called Zaton. So that's in Prigradica, in Korčula, in island Korčula. In 1920s, it's the first big immigration or emigration from Korčula, from former Yugoslavia to Brazil. And for the main emigration from Yugoslavia to Brazil in that era was from islands, Dalmatian islands, particularly Korčula. So they were the first Yugoslavs that ended up there. And I show that because my aunt is let's say connected to that emigration. This is a group of Serbs that it's a photo from a photo that I will show you later on, where like in whose house I made this photograph. But it's interesting story also that first Serbs that ended up in Brazil ended up there in early 1950s. So this is like photo from 1950s, and it was, let's say, anti-communist, all kinds of like anti-communist
Feelings. Yeah.
not feelings, but the ones that were like running away from Yugoslavia or that were in Germany in prisons during the war. They gathered in Sao Paulo. So Sao Paulo was the center of that Serbian emigration, and it was for a long time existing Serbian club, you know, or Serbian association, and they had a restaurant that was called, let's say, Serbian Club. Practically, it was, the restaurant was more famous than their political activities. And I'll come, you know, to the cook of that restaurant. Okay, this woman in the middle is my aunt, you know, look, that is that was. They are the Toma knows Andrea, but those two persons were main guides. I would say the ones that opened the Brazil that is outside of that middle class, you know, and this regular or already seen and experienced milieux. She is, as I told you, anthropologist from Sao Paulo, and he was musician. He died in the meanwhile, and he was a musician, not from favela, but let's say next to favela, you know. So it is in that sense, and it was with them, you know, really very different realities that I was entering. I will come to that. And this is another guy also from here that in a crazy way came to Brazil. He is from Novi Sad, and he was running a restaurant in Sao Paulo, and that's his wife and daughter.
Sorry, before, both are Brazilian from the picture before? The two before? The one before this? The one
just
before?
a second. Yeah, they are both Brazilians.
This one both Brazilian. Okay.
Yeah, she is white, you know, of let's say Spanish and Jewish and I don't know like which origins, from mother's side, from father's side, and she's both parents of hers are university professors, so that kind of milieu, upper middle class, and he is musician, that is not from the lowest low, but let's say one step, you know, beyond, you know, so, yeah, living that kind of life of a musician that is really capable. He was the only one with whom you could enter really problematic or tough areas without feeling pretty secure, you know, because they were calling him, his nickname was Reverendo, like velečasni, how would you say that, reverend in English, yes. So he was really entering everywhere, but not having much money, usually like very much without money. And this is this cousin of mine, who is he was born in Belgrade. That's my aunt's younger son, who ended up in Brazil after bombing of Belgrade. He basically, in order to like run away from serving the army and stuff, he went to Brazil and let's say finished that school training for helicopter pilot. So it was with him that I really had that rare opportunity and luxury to travel by helicopter different places, and it's really, I would say, I didn't had ride by helicopter before or after. It was only in Brazil that I had that luxury to have a helicopter ride, and it's really unique perspective that it provides you. And this is this guy is Moma from Kragujevac, that with whom I traveled by car to Brazil. He is the guy that ended up in Brazil in mid-1990s. He went, it was, Argentina was one of 5 countries in the world that didn't require visas for citizens of Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. That was the passport that we were having in that time. So he ended up, he went from Serbia to Argentina and was working in Cordoba, traveled to Brazil, met Brazilian girl, got married in Brazil. Anyway, to make long story short, in that time and even today, he is still producing handmade things, all kinds of stuff made of knitted from palha do buriti, as they call it in Brazil. It's a palm leaf of the palm
Who's
tree.
Mama, in the green shirt or the white shirt?
No, the one in the white shirt.
The white shirt.
Yeah. This one is
Yeah.
Brazilian. But he was asking me, this is this photo is from Porto Seguro. It's a place where Pedro Cabral landed with his ship in 1500. Now that is tourist, very tourist place, like Makarska, Brazilian Makarska. So it's Indians that are running the shop. So he is practically negotiating. That's what he does. He practically he lives in Maranhão. That is very northern state of Brazil. He has production of those jijabijas, and then he plays that in truck and travels all around the coast through these tourist places, and then goes back through inland up north. And in one of those journeys, I was his, let's say, assistant. And here he was like telling me, make a photo how I'm selling Indian stuff to Indians, because Indians are having shops with Indian, all kinds of jijabijas in the very tourist place. And it's mama, coming from Maranhão, from the jungle, that is bringing, these products. And I would say, yeah, with him I was traveling by land. This is also interesting story. It's a guy called Rodrigo Jovanovic. I have his story in the book. He is third generation Roma or Gypsy family that is originally from the area of Shabbats, that ended up by accident in late 1950s or early 1960s. He doesn't know details. He just knows that grandpa and grandma, they wanted to go to America. And they were in Italy, they ended up on the boat, and practically, to their surprise, they,
like Colombo,
they came out in Brazil, not in America.
So South America, because
they wanted to go to United States.
No, but it's interesting because in the United States, like Latin American don't like when they use the term America, because America is a big.
Of course,
like
but
South America,
I'm
North
saying
America.
for them, that's what they knew. They knew America. That's so they wanted to go to America. They didn't want to go to South America. They didn't want to go to Brazil. But when they ended up in that reality, it turned to be okay for them. And Rodrigo is very interesting because he learned. Usually, people lose language. I mean, whatever group, immigrant group, and wherever, whether in Sweden or in France or in Brazil even more, because you feel as in the ocean of Portuguese language. So already in the second generation, kids don't speak any other language. He is third generation, and he learned Serbian very well. And it's interesting story also how I got to him through this family of mine. They told they knew that I'm looking for interesting characters. And so when we came, and they came, it's one part of family that came to Brazil in early 1990s when war started here, 1992. So they didn't speak language, they needed time to learn it. So one day in Campinas, they are in the supermarket, in the shop, going back home, and from the one garden from the house, they hear music that is familiar, that is from this area, and they hear people singing some, let's say, Balkan, Serbian songs, and then they wait for them to end, approach, and it turns out that none of those people that were playing and singing in Serbian don't speak language, that they just know songs, and that was his family, and he was just a little boy then, so he was also learning language with this family of mine. Anyway, and this is also interesting guy, Paulo Brito. He was talking about language. He was the guy, one of the contacts that I got through my aunt, the guy that was serving in Brazilian embassy in Belgrade in late 1980s, second part of 1980s. So it's the guy that has completely frozen. For me, that was one of wonderful experiences, I would say, he has frozen memory of Yugoslavia and of Belgrade from that time. And what I say, our memory, a memory of us that experienced wars and all these shits that happened in the meanwhile is polluted. So even memory to that time is in some way polluted with what came later. With this guy, he had still that passion and enthusiasm as he is in Belgrade of like 1986 or something like that. And the funny thing, talking about language, my aunt, gave me his contact. When you are in Rio, call him. So I called the guy, and my aunt told me, but he knew some Serbian, but he probably forgot it. I mean, it's like 20-something years ago, that he was in Yugoslavia. You lose language if you don't practice. So I meet the guy in Rio. We get to his car, and he speaks Serbian, and basically there is music, I don't know, Parni Valjak, Bajaga, and he says, I don't have anyone to talk with, but fortunately and fortunately is, that there are traffic jams wherever you are in big cities in Brazil, so you spend hours in the car. So fortunately in the car I have time to listen. So basically he kept his language through singing those songs in the car. And it was also very interesting experience with him and going through.
Yeah, you're right. In Sao Paulo, especially, there are very big traffic jams in Sao Paulo.
In Sao Paulo, but in Rio as well. Sao Paulo is the worst, but Rio is also not much better. In Rio, you have also
you're right.
and Salvador is also terrible in that sense, because it's not that big, but in terms of that urbanistic mess and infrastructure, traffic infrastructure, it's a mess. So you really spend a lot of time in the cars. Generally, all the cities with these skyscrapers and lack of infrastructure are pain in the ass in terms of transportation. So you really feel